Thank you very much, Crystal. Let me add my welcome to all who are joining us online and all who are here in the building, whether this is your first time or your thousandth time here. It's great to have you. My name's Dan. And I was chatting with someone a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to call her Nat. She was grieving the death of her father. Nat isn't a Christian, but she was clearly really curious spiritually. She'd been to see a medium in the past. She was going to see this chap again soon. And she said to me, everyone prays. Everyone calls out to something. Now, you might think that in our sort of highly scientific age, prayer is just for the sort of the highly religious people, the head in the sand type people. But actually, one recent survey in this country found that 6 out of 7 people pray. And that if anything, young people are more likely than older people to pray. I can still remember hearing the message that Tamsin had gone into very early labour. I'm sure many of us here prayed when we heard that news. We prayed hard, didn't we? Maybe even those of us who wouldn't call ourselves Christians, we felt called to pray. We felt that was all we could do, the only thing we could do in the face of such life and death circumstances. I can remember sitting with Tamsin next to Zeke's incubator, marveling at all the medical technology and the marvelous stuff around us and the wonderful care of the staff and so on, yet aware of how fragile Zeke was. We couldn't even touch him. And we prayed. And prayer can seem so feeble in the face of such odds, can't it? And yet prayer can be so powerful as well. I'm sure others of you here who don't know Zeke have had your own situations where you felt so desperate that you have prayed, even if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. And yet, as I say, prayer can be powerful. I was reading again the story just the other day of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'm old enough to remember that falling. But did you know the role that prayer played in that? There was a pastor in East Germany who was sickened by the injustice of the communist regime. He started peace prayers in his church every Monday evening. And for years, he had an ever-growing number of people come on those Monday evenings to pray that God would have mercy on their country. And after 7 years of praying, a crowd of 70,000 people gathered one Monday evening in October to demand an end to injustice. And their message in their placard said, "No violence." And their protest spread to other cities, and a month later, the wall came down. And one protester was asked, well, who organized these protests? And he simply replied, there was only one leadership, Monday evening, St. Nicholas Church. And even the former Prime Minister of East Germany agreed. He said, we were prepared for anything, but not for candles and prayers. That's the power of prayer. So prayer can be hugely powerful, and yet to so many people it doesn't feel as though prayer is breaking down walls. It feels like prayer is just sort of speaking to a brick wall. You don't get anything back. Is it worth doing? The comedian Spike Milligan was once asked, do you ever pray? And he replied very honestly. He said, yes, I do pray desperately all the time. Get me out of this mess. But I have no idea who I'm praying to. And I guess a lot of people could echo that sort of comments. You've prayed desperately for Zeke, maybe, but you're not really sure who you're praying to. You're not really sure if your prayers are being heard. That lady, Nat, that I mentioned, she knows I'm a vicar, so we talked a little bit about the Christian approach to prayer and how Jesus invites us to pray to God as our Father, a Father in heaven who is powerful and loving and cares for us. And she said, as her eyes watered, that gives me a warm feeling just hearing about that. And you see, that's the difference between prayer as desperation and prayer as relationship. Prayer when it's all we can do, so we just cry out in desperation, but prayer as relationship, knowing God as a Father, one who hears and answers our prayers. I read recently about a Muslim who'd come to faith in Jesus, and he said, I love to pray. I like that any prayers to God as a follower of Christ are not guided as Muslim prayers are, but rather are expressed as a true conversation with God. I can tell him what's on my heart. That's prayer as relationship. So how can we move from prayer as desperation to prayer as relationship? Who can move from praying in desperation to praying in relationship? Who is God going to hear in prayer? And that's why Jesus told this story. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And he's telling about this story about two people who are going to pray to help us understand how prayer works, who God hears and answers. And spoiler alert, it's not who you think it is. So the first chap is a Pharisee. They were the super holy people, the people who were so concerned to do what was right by God that they went over and above just to make sure that they didn't make any mistakes even by accident. Jesus says the Pharisee stood by himself. That's because he didn't want to run the risk of being defiled by being too close to other people. He was super holy. He didn't want to be with the great unwashed. He wanted to stand by himself. He was so good. And he prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like the other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. Now, he sounds a bit smug, doesn't he? That's the problem with people who are so confident in their own holiness and goodness. They can't help but look down on other people. Today they'd be patrolling the Twitterverse, sort of sending out these short, smug tweets, being really judgmental on other people. But don't think that this Pharisee is all bad. Far from it. As he points out, he's not a robber or an evildoer or an adulterer. I don't know if you've ever had anything stolen from you. I have. It's not nice, is it? You know, the world would be a nicer place if there were fewer robbers and more people like the Pharisee. I don't know if you've ever seen real evil up close. I've talked to people whose lives have been shattered by evil. It is sickening. The world would be a nicer place if there were fewer of the bad guys and more of the good guys like this guy. And I don't know if you've ever known a couple whose relationship has been damaged irretrievably by unfaithfulness. Maybe you know all too well the deep resentment and hurt that causes. It ruins lives and splits up families for decades. The world would be a nicer place if there were less adulterers and more people like this Pharisee, faithful. So yes, this Pharisee might be a bit smug, but he could be an awful lot worse. And he's so devout as well. The Jewish people were supposed to fast once a year on the Day of Atonement. This guy fasts twice a week. Now you might think the 5-2 diet is pretty recent, but no, it's as ancient as Jesus. It just wasn't marketed in quite the same way. And the Jewish law said to tithe, to give away 1/10 of your oil and your grain and your wine. But this guy, he gives away 1/10 of all he has. Again, he's going above and beyond. You know, if we all gave away 1/10 of all we had, no charity would ever be short of cash. The world would be a much nicer place. So that's the Pharisee. But what about the other chap? The tax man. If the Pharisees were the super holy people, the tax man was the super despised person. There were two problems with them. First, they collaborated with the occupying Roman forces. And second, they charged over and above what the Romans asked for, and they pocketed the rest for themselves. Imagine a Ukrainian living in Russian-occupied Ukraine, working for the Russian occupiers, extorting money from fellow Ukrainians to feed the Russian war machine. Imagine that. That is how despised this taxman was. And this taxman stood at a distance, maybe because he didn't want to face the jeers of his fellow countrymen. Maybe because he'd never been to the temple before. He didn't know sort of where to stand and when to sit and all that sort of caper. So he just shuffled along, so full of shame he couldn't even lift his face to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he just beat his breast as an expression of his remorse. That wasn't normal behavior at all in those times. This man is clearly deeply distraught at his life and the mess that he's in. And he just says this, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. He knew he'd made a mess of his life. He knew he didn't deserve anything from God. He knew that he couldn't ask his fellow countrymen for mercy. After all, he hadn't had mercy on them. He'd fleeced them out of money, their hard-earned money, and put it into his pockets. If anything, his fellow countrymen would, if they got their hands on him, well, they certainly wouldn't show mercy. So he asked mercy of the only person that he could do. He prayed the only prayer that he dared pray. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Maybe he remembered from years attending Jewish Sabbath school as a child that God is slow to anger and rich in mercy. That God forgives those who come with a broken and contrite heart. He asked for all he could, mercy. Now, Jesus has set this up as a bit of a panto. The characters are caricatures in some ways. You've got by this point in the story, you've got the crowd cheering for the Pharisees, the super holy guys. Of course they're good in God's eyes. Just look how well they behave in life. Just look how devout they are with their fasting and their tithing and so on, giving thousands to charity. The Pharisee is an amazing chap. Of course God is going to look after him. And then there's the crowd are booing for this tax guy because what he's doing is illegal, it's unjust. How on earth could God ever sort of look with favor on him? He's clearly the villain of the story. And then Jesus pulls the punchline and he says, it's this man, the tax man, who went home right with God, not the other chap. It was the sinner who went home good with God, not the devout chap. And at this point, I can just picture the crowd sort of scratching their heads and sort of turning to each other and sort of saying, did I hear that right? Did I get that right? You mean that all the good that this Pharisee is doing doesn't count for anything? And Jesus says, no. Not if it's out of a sense of duty or obligation or to show off. God isn't interested in your religious performance. He's interested in your heart. And that guy, well, his heart is proud and hard. And the crowd are still sort of scratching their heads and saying, but I still don't understand the tax man. He's a terrible guy. How could God accept him? And Jesus says, well, he's being honest, isn't he? I can work with a heart that is honest. Let me explain this in a way that someone once explained it to me. Okay, imagine we've got a scale here. Let's have 100 up here, and we've got 0 down here. And let's say that someone like Jesus, completely wonderful, perfect, he's up here. This is a scale of goodness from 0 to 100. Apologies to those who've seen this before. So Jesus is perfect. Let's say that Hitler is way down here somewhere. Okay, now let's say that this Pharisee is here somewhere. He's pretty good, but I haven't put him higher up because he's got all this pride and so on going on in his heart and all the other stuff that we don't know about yet. And let's say that the tax guy is down here somewhere. He does these terrible things, these illegal things. And he's got nothing good going for him that we know of. Now, what's going on in these guys' prayers is this. The Pharisee is sort of looking down and saying, look how good I am. Look how high I've climbed. Look at everything that's good about me. But he can't see this gap here, the gap between him and God. He can't see the pride and so on in his heart. He's blind to that. Whereas the tax guy is looking like this. And he can see all that's wrong when he compares himself to Jesus. And so he cries out, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And when people are like this Pharisee and, they just think about how great they are, it automatically makes them look down on everyone else. And that makes them not very nice to be around. The people who are smug and proud, they're not nice to be around. It's not just that they go away sort of not connected with God, but actually they get disconnected from other people because of their attitude and their pride and so on. But the guys like this taxman who say, God, have mercy on me, they realize how bad they are. Actually, they're not proud. They don't look down on other people. They know how bad they are and that other people have got their struggles too. And what we need to learn from this parable, it doesn't matter how high you've climbed, if you can't see where you fall short with God, then you'll never be right with God. That's the warning that Jesus gives us. But the encouragement is, it doesn't matter how far you've fallen. If you call out to God, God says, I can work with you. I'm here for you. He's ready to step in straight away and help. And I don't know about you, but I found that a really helpful way of understanding what it means to call out to God for mercy. He's ready and waiting to step in, but we just have to make sure that we're looking up to him rather than we're looking down on others and just seeing how good we are. Now, I wonder where you'd put yourself on that. I would probably put myself about sort of halfway up. Some of you might think, oh, Dan, you ought to be much higher than that. No. I know all the times that I get unfairly angry with those who've done nothing wrong. I know all the times I walk past those in need. I know all the times that I treat Jesus badly and I ignore Jesus and some of the things that he says. I don't love my neighbor as myself. I know all the hidden things going on in my heart that none of you see. So I put myself about halfway up. I wonder where you'd put yourself. Maybe a little bit higher than me, great. Maybe a little bit lower, that's fine. But the important thing is, are you looking just sort of inside yourself to say, look how good I am? Are you comparing yourself to the bottom and saying, look how good I am, I'm not as bad as all those other people? Or are you looking up to God and saying, I can see how bad I am. I need Jesus to come and have mercy on me. I don't know if you know Charlie Mackes's book and film, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. I had to read that to make sure I got it in the right order. I love some of the one-liners in that. And there's one where the boy asks, what's the bravest thing you've ever said? And the horse answers, help. And our culture tends to think that asking for help is a real sign of weakness. But no, asking for help can be the greatest sign of strength. Lena mentioned that about Tamsin earlier, didn't she? Asking for help can be a great sign of strength. And the taxman in this parable says, help, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And remember that this story is set in the temple. These two men are stood in front of a great altar where sacrifices are made day by day for the sins of the people. And it's as though this, the taxman sort of can see this sacrifice going on, but he says, well, surely that sacrifice can't even pay for my sin, not with what I do. And that's why he says, have mercy on me, a sinner. Make atonement for me, literally, are the words. And of course, not many months after this story, Jesus did just that. He offered himself as a sacrifice to make atonement for the sins of this taxman and for the sins of me and for the sins of everyone here and everyone watching online. He died so we could be put right with God, so we could begin this relationship with God, so we could know the certainty of prayer as relationship, not prayer as desperation. So we could know, as Nat put it, that warm feeling that comes from knowing that our Father in heaven cares for us and is listening to our prayers. Jesus finished this parable by saying, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So which of those two camps do you come into? When you're approaching God, do you come thinking, yes, I'm good. This is who I am. This is why God should listen to me. Or do you come thinking, I need God's help. I really need God's help. If I'm honest, if I look inside, there's much I'm ashamed of. Other people might not see it, but I know it. Therefore, God, will you have mercy on me, a sinner? And Jesus says, I tell you, that person, not the other, will go home today right with God. Now, there are some people here who've been Christians here for years. And at the beginning of the Christian life, it's easy to start off, calling out for God's mercy. We suddenly realize how much we need God. But then as time goes on, as we let Jesus shape our heart and our character and our attitudes and so on, the pride can begin to creep in. We can begin to think, oh yeah, I've got this Christian life pretty well licked now. So would you hear the warning from this parable? That actually we need God's mercy today every bit as much as we needed God's mercy the day we became a Christian. And we will carry on needing it every day for the rest of our lives. And there are other people here who pray desperately. But a bit like Spike Milligan, you've no idea who you're praying to. And so you can't really feel confident that your prayers are being heard, let alone being answered. I hope this story from Jesus helps you to see why. And I hope that you hear Jesus' invitation to begin experiencing prayer as relationship rather than carrying on with prayer as desperation. And it all starts with saying, God, have mercy on me. And there's two particular things I'd encourage you to do if that's describing you this morning. The first is to keep on praying, but rather than just sort of praying to God or praying to some unknown sort of force or being in the universe, just pray to Jesus. Pray to Jesus and just see what happens. That's all. The other thing I'd encourage you to try doing is to take one of these try praying booklets on the way out. I'll offer them to people. And this booklet just takes a week to work through, and it says, look, God may or may not exist. It doesn't matter what you think at the moment. Just try praying for a week. What have you got to lose? And on each day of the week, it's got various stories and a few words from Jesus, and there's sort of linked videos you can watch and that sort of thing. Things to encourage you and help you begin to experience prayer as relationship. If you don't like the print version, there's an app version. I put a link on the homepage of the website under the latest links. You can try downloading the app instead. Or for those online, if you want the print version, then get in contact with us and we'll gladly send you one. But here's the thing, when it comes to relating to God, remember this, everyone who exalts themselves will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. God will work in their lives. Let me pray for us. Lord Jesus, this story that you told is so short and yet so powerful. It reveals things inside our hearts which maybe we were unaware of. Lord, thank you that you teach us to pray to our Father in heaven. Would you help each one of us to keep on growing in that experience of knowing you as our Father and to experience the delight of prayer as relationship. And then maybe there's some here this morning who haven't really tried praying or have felt that their prayers are just up to a brick wall. And you've sensed something of what the tax man did in this parable, just saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's not a prayer I can pray for you. That's a prayer you have to pray for yourself. You don't have to pray out loud, but just in the quietness of your hearts, you can make those words your own, and God will hear and answer. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Amen.